Balakrishnan and friends. May I at the outset express my deep sense of appreciation to my dear friend Madhu for inviting me to come here this evening and share some of my thoughts on a fascinating subject, namely the Indian diaspora. For those of us who belong to the teaching profession, speaking is not a difficult task, but to be brief and beautiful is an arduous one. I'm reminded of an anecdote with the former British Prime Minister James Callaghan mentioned in the course of his visit to India a few years ago. Yale University in the United States decided to honor one of its distinguished alumni who was awarded the Nobel Prize. The chairman of the university invited him and asked him to address the faculty and students. The Nobel laureate was wondering what he should speak on. Finally, he decided to pick up each one of the letters which constituted the name of the university and weave around a theme. And he spoke on Y for you, A for ambition, L for liberty, and E for energy, and spoke for more than an hour. At the end of the lecture, one of his professors went to him and said, "I'm happy you did not go to the Massachusetts." I should try to be as brief as possible. The Hollywood actress Elizabeth Taylor told her husband soon after her 9th marriage, "This too shall be brief." To be an Indian outside India or to be a Chinese outside China has several complex facets. Political sociologists use the term Indians overseas or Chinese overseas, which essentially means transplantation of the Indian community to a different setting in an alien land. Transplantation Chinese community from China to a different setting in an alien land. That is unsatisfactory because the Indian communities who live abroad retain some of their Indianness with them, but at the same time adjust to new surroundings. In other words, retention of Indianness and adaptation to new surroundings are twin facets of these groups. The second term which is very popular in India is the term diaspora, which the Singhi committee also uses, and the media uses, academics also use that. The term diaspora is Greek in origin, but a Jewish connotation. The Jews were thrown out of Palestine as a result of persecution. They dispersed to different parts of the world, but wherever they went, they hankered for their homeland. And when Israel was created after the Second World War, the Jews went back to Israel. So diaspora means one, dispersal as a result of persecution and hankering for their homeland. As far as the Indians and the Chinese communities are concerned, there were several pull and push factors which sent them abroad. But persecution, I submit, was not one of them. And most of them who are living abroad will not come back to India. So the term diaspora also is unsatisfactory. But since the media uses them, we will use them. We have to understand the legal distinction among the diaspora, because unless we understand the legal distinction, we will not be in a position to understand their problems and prospects. First are those who have gone to these countries and have become citizens of the host country. They would love to be called as South African citizens of Indian origin, Malaysian citizens of Indian origin, Singapore citizens of Indian origin. That's the first category. The second category are the stateless people, those who are neither the citizens of the countries in which they live, nor have they taken Indian citizenship. And as you all know, the problems of the stateless people in Ceylon was a contentious issue between India and Sri Lanka for several years after independence. If you look at the Singhvi Committee report, in Myanmar, we still have about 450,000 people of Indian origin who are stateless. That is, who have neither taken Indian citizenship nor Burmese citizenship. Unfortunately, it does not figure in the radar of the South Bloc, and in the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas also, it does not find much mention. There are, according to Singhvi Committee report, 50,000 people of Indian origin who are stateless in Malaysia. According to HINDRAF, the Hindu Rights Action Force, there are nearly 100,000 of them. The tragedy is that in Malaysia, according to the constitution, jus soli, citizenship by birth is provided. But these people are all born there, but they do not have birth certificate, and still they are kept outside. The third category of people are those who have gone abroad for a limited period, holding their Indian passport for work. Most of the people who live in West Asia and provide sinews for the development of these countries during the last few years are Indian passport holders, Indian citizens who have gone there. Once the economy declines, they will have to come back to India, because most of the West Asian countries do not provide for citizenship. The fourth category are the category known as the overseas Indian citizens, which was introduced by the Congress government and followed by the present government also. And nearly, I tried to get the figure, but unfortunately it's not available. But according to the Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs, which has now become a part of the MEA, nearly 5 lakh forms have been distributed. They have to apply individually to the Indian embassy, then their application is verified, they are given overseas Indian citizenship, but they do not have the right to vote, and they cannot stand for election. Sometimes it's very difficult to say whether a person is of Indian origin or not. Take the case of Dr. Mahathir, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia. His father is a Muslim from Malabar, what we generally call the Kaka. The Muslims in Malabar are referred to as the Kaka. But he does not mention about his Indian identity at all. He considers himself as a Malay. The same thing about Dr. Anwar Ibrahim, who was the former Deputy Prime Minister. His ancestors were Tamils on Tamil Nadu, but he also identifies himself as the Malay and never speaks about his Tamil ancestry. Now it's simplistic and naive to assume that the problem that these people face and the prospects of the future hold for them are identical. Their present status and future prospect depend upon the nature of their migration, their educational attainments, their professional qualifications, and above all the minority-majority syndrome in the countries in which they live. Thus, in the United States and Canada, where large-scale migration took place, made from the 1960s onwards, what was referred to at that time as the brain drain, they occupy a very high position. They are an object of envy and admiration. In South Africa and Southern Rhodesia, until very recently, they were subjected to various forms of apartheid. In countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Trinidad, and other countries, they enjoy political power. And in neighboring countries, Sri Lanka, these people were converted into a merchandise to be divided between India and Sri Lanka in the name of good neighborly relations. I'll briefly touch upon 4 cycles of migration. The first migration took place from the 1st century AD to about 10th century, which were a large number of Indian princes, priests, merchants, artisans went mainly to the Southeast Asian country. Their interaction with the local people the cultural efflorescence of these countries, of the prevalence of Ramayana in many of these countries. Monuments like Angkor Wat, Borobudur and Lara Jongrong and all are because of these people who went to these countries, various classes, merchants, priests, princes, etc. and all. You may know that in Thailand, the title of the king is Rama, and the coronation is being done by Brahmins who originally went from Benares. In the Temple of Emerald Buddha in Bangkok, in the month of what we call the Margari, the famous Tamil hymns, both Saivite and Vaishnavite, what were Tirupavai and Tirupavai, is being sung by those people. They do not know the meaning of Tirupavai and Tirupavai, but still they do it with great religious gusto. That is the first wave. The second waves are those who went under the colonial rule to various parts of the world as labor to for the benefit of the colonial economy. They were lured from many areas, and then they went to Ceylon, they went to South Africa, they went to Mauritius, they went to Suriname, they went to Fiji. And this section of the people went as coolies and they were exploited. There was a lot of misery when they went there. They were also lured. I was reading that those who went to Suriname, the agents who sent them from Calcutta to Suriname, told them, we are going to a birthplace, we are going to a holy place associated with Lord Rama. And after about 3 months they reached Suriname. The name Suriname comes from Sri Ram, the holy place associated with that people. They suffered a lot. In fact, Gandhiji sent C.F. Andrews to Fiji to study situation, and in his report, C.F. Andrews mentioned about the sex ratio. There was 1 woman to 20 men. And you could have imagined the suffering that these women would have undergone. Unfortunately, the Singhvi Committee report, or many of us, we are not worried about these people. We are more worried about the Indians in the United States and Canada because many of our family members are there, but I feel I am one of those who plead for greater attention to these people. The third thought of migration took place after the Second World War, when Britain became a welfare state and many qualified people went to Britain. And from the 1960s, the United States started attracting many qualified people to their country. The last phase was the economic development of the West Asian countries, where a lot of technical people, workers and all went there, and they are all Indian citizens and all. One of the fascinating areas of research as far as diaspora is concerned is how far do they retain Indian culture. In some cases they had changed. Like in Fiji, the classic example were a lot of change. The long distance they had to cover from Calcutta to Fiji, they forgot their religious differences. They forgot their caste differences. And all of them, they celebrate Deepavali and Holi without understanding the significance of Deepavali and Holi. And they developed a common language called the Fijian Hindi, which is mainly Bhojpuri in character. In fact, there is a great classic written in Fijian Hindi called Dauka Puran by one Professor Subramani, who is a Tamil author. And many of the Fijians, as a result of persecution in that country, are leaving for greener pastures to United States, to Canada, to Australia and to New Zealand. I'll give you another illustration. A few years ago, I spent about a couple of months in Canada to do research work among the Sri Lankan Tamil refugees who are settled there. I was living with my brother, who is a Canadian citizen, and few blocks away there was another Trinidadian Hindu is the diaspora of the diaspora. His forefathers went to Trinidad. From Trinidad he had moved over to Canada. And something struck me about his house. Outside the main building there was a small structure in which the saffron flag was flying. I got curious about it. I introduced myself to him. I went to his house for a cup of tea and then asked him, what is that small structure where there is a saffron flag? Then he said, that is the place where I do my daily puja. I do not do it inside the house because the concept of pollution and purity they carried with them. So I told him, you come to my apartment in Besant Nagar in Chennai, part of the kitchen is the puja room. In other words, what I am saying is that they are intellectually fossilized at that time, that their forefathers went there. Similarly, if you go to Malaysia and Singapore, you find Garuda Dukkam. You know what it is, like a Garuda Dukkam. Or fire walking, though these things are fast disappearing from Tamil Nadu. So, you find among the overseas Indian communities a certain amount of retaining their tradition and all those. The classic one that I want to state, since you quoted from Meradam Joker, I want to quote from another film. I don't know how many of you have seen Meera Nair's film Mississippi Masala. The film centers around the Gujarati family who were thrown out of Uganda by Idi Amin. They collect all their belongings, leave the country. When they reach the Ugandan-Kenya border, the customs authorities check their belongings. One by one they attempt and throw them out. And they had a transistor. The transistor was also thrown out. And when it was thrown out, it started working. And the famous song from Raj Kapoor's film 320 came. The song that you all, many of you know, Mera Juta Hai Japani, Ye Patru Englistani, Sir Pe Lal Topi Rusi, Fir Bhi Dil Hai Hindustani. These shoes are made in Japan, my trousers are made in England, the red cap in my head is Russian, but my heart is Hindustani. Which in many ways represents their attitude in alien surroundings, especially in countries in Africa, there is also a color bar and all. I have got other illustration, but because of lack of time, I will not go into that. Now, what was the attitude of the Indian nationalist leaders toward the Indian community? As we all know, Gandhiji became Mahatma in South Africa, and he evolved Satyagraha there, fighting for the indentured laborers. As my former Vice Chancellor Chandran Devanation used to say, the making of the Mahatma took place in South Africa. And Nehru used to visit them. He went to Sri Lanka in 1929, then again in 1945. Gandhiji went to Ceylon in 1927 to popularize Khadi and prohibition. In his last speech in the Reddyar Sangam in Colombo, Gandhiji told them, "You are in a strange land. I appeal to you to identify yourself with the local people as sugar in milk. When sugar dissolves in the milk, it becomes sweet. So your presence in the midst of these strange people should be like sugar and milk." The concept of sugar and milk, Gandhiji was born in Porbandar. There were also some Parsis. Arrival of the Parsis to India, where they escaped from persecution in Iran and came to the kingdom of Navsari and told the king that we hear that you give refuge to all those who want it, and therefore we have come. The king told him that we already have some Muslims in this state, they may not like if I give you asylum. So the Parsi religious leader asked the king to get some milk. Then he requested for some sugar, and then slowly he put the sugar and stirred it. The milk became sweet. It did not overflow. And the Parsi religious leader told the king that my presence in your midst, our presence in your midst will be like sugar in milk. and the small community, less than 100,000 in number, mainly concentrated in the city of Bombay, have done so much for the intellectual advancement of the country, whether it in the field of media, films, journalism and all there. Now from these communities, 4 waves, a lot of great people have emerged. From among the group who went to the coolies to this country, the names of Dr. Cheddi Jagan, who became the Prime Minister of British Guyana, Sivasagar Ringulam of Mauritius, Yusuf Dadu and Monty Naik in South Africa, Jagannath Lakshman of Sudan, Devan Nair of Singapore, Sambandhan of Malaysia, and many others. Through dint of hard work and education, children and grandchildren of these endangered leaders have made a niche for themselves in their chosen profession. They include Nobel laureate V.S. Naipaul, Sridath Rampal, Anirudh Jagannath, Suryanarayan Chandrapal, and Dr. Samivelu. The former Prime Minister Vajpayee put it, few people who entered foreign lands can claim such a testimony. Among those who went to the post-independent era, there are Nobel laureates, Jagadish Bhagavati, Amartya, Farid Zakaria, Zubin Mehta, many others. Because that environment provides for competition and various others. The Indianness of the Indians overseas, I will give you 2 illustrations. There was a famous West Indian cricketer called Kali Charan. He used to hit huge sixes. So a journalist asked him, from where do you get all this dynamism and energy? He opened his shirt, tattoo Hanuman. Hanuman is Suryanarayan Chandrapal, the West Indian batsman, he came to India and he stayed on for 1 week after the test matches were over. The journalist asked him, why are you staying for 1 week? I want to find my roots in Eastern UP. So he went there to trace his roots. The journalist asked him, what are you going to take for your family members from India? Then I am going to take Gangadhar. So the emotional involvement with India is something which one has to understand and appreciate. Then there is also generation gap. Those who went to United States, went to England and others, they wanted to retain. They want to make good in those countries because that provides opportunities to make money. But the second generation are more influenced by their classmates and all. So you have the ABCD, American-born confused desis, who come to India, speak even Tamil in an American accent and become. So there is the generation gap. The first generation wants to remember India, wants to lead an Indian life in their strange surrounding, but the children who are more influenced by their peers and friends would love to change it and all. There's a conflict with them. There are 2 films which I have used in my writing, 2 Hindi films. One is Pardesh and the other is Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge. If there is time I can narrate that thing, otherwise I... In 1945, Jawaharlal Nehru goes to Madaya. And there he makes the famous statement, Indians wherever they go, they suffer a lot. I am appalled by the agony and suffering that they undergo, but soon we will be free and our strong arm will go and protect them. In the Indian National Congress annual session, the last day was devoted to the problems of the Indians overseas. So that was the commitment of the Indian national movement. Look at the case of the Chinese. Just as Gandhiji had his political baptism in South Africa, Dr. Sun Yat-sen had his political baptism among the overseas Chinese, and the overseas Chinese financed the revolution. And when the revolution took place in 1911, they drafted a new constitution where they proclaimed a revolutionary doctrine as far as Chinese, who is a Chinese citizen. They said, wherever there are Chinese, all of them are Chinese citizens. In other words, citizenship went by kinship and not by the place of residence. So a Chinese may be born in Canada, in the United States, in Timbuktu, in Australia. All of them are citizens of China. And that created problems between the Chinese and the local nationalists. And the indigenous nationalism of many countries in Southeast Asia, in Malaya, in Indonesia, in Philippines, there was a xenophobic character. In Burma, as we all know, there was an anti-Indian connotation. The exploitation by the Chettiars was not very much liked by these people. So, but after independence, Nehru found that many of them are taking shelter under domestic jurisdiction. And they introduced citizenship legislation which adversely affected the Indian communities. And Nehru could not do anything. Then we started adopting a touch me not policy. The Indian embassy never took interest in the problems of the Indian communities. And in some places, they also reversed the policy of identifying themselves. So in the case of Sri Lanka, with Lal Bahadur Shastri and Srimao Bandaranaike signed the Srimao Shastri Pact, but we decided to take back many of these people of Indian origin as Indian citizens, which was a bad precedent for the policy of the overseas Chinese. In Burma, they were edged out. We know the Burma Bazaar came from the Burmese repatriates. They were not even permitted to bring their savings. And you know, the Tamil community always saves in the form of gold. Even Mangalya Sutra they could not bring. Then they denationalized the Burmese currency, the kyat. So the Indian community was affected very badly and India could not do anything. The policy got changed when Rajiv Gandhi came to power. In Fiji, Rabuka came to power. He staged a coup and Mahendra Singh Chaudhary and all were recalled. At that time Rajiv Gandhi said, we must do something. We must show the Indian community abroad that we stand by them. So the Indian diplomacy came into action in a big way and Fiji was expelled from the Commonwealth. The BJP, which came to power later, took always interest in the Indians overseas, especially the communities who live abroad in the United States and the other countries and all. Vajpayee used to go and meet them, and at that time the demand started that they should have dual citizenship. Dual citizenship, the Jews for example have dual citizenship. They can be citizens of Israel and citizens of the United States. In fact, we used to have a usual quiz questions. Which is the capital of the United States? Washington or Tel Aviv? Tel Aviv perhaps is the right answer and not, because the Jews dominate the American intellectual scene, foreign policy establishment. Narasimha Rao was very astute because citizenship implies political loyalty. I am an Indian citizen. That means that I am loyal to India. I must pay the taxes, participate in the election and all those things. Dual citizenship will imply dual loyalty and it will clash with Indian interests. You may recall that during the Second World War, all the Japanese who were living in the United States were detained by the American government. So Narasimha Rao said, we will not give you dual citizenship, but we will give you whatever you want. You want to own property in India, you want to come to India more often and all. Was done. But later Congress government and the BJP government have introduced overseas Indian citizenship, but with a proviso that they cannot stand for election and they cannot vote here. But in case of conflict between, say, India and Sri Lanka or India and Nepal, those who have got overseas Indian citizenship will be considered the fifth column. So according to me, it is a very negative way of approaching it, and only time will answer whether it was a good move or not. I'll come to the last part of my presentation, namely what is the role of diaspora in economic transformation. The Chinese overseas have contributed so much for the economic transformation of China. It has been estimated that nearly 70 to 80% of the finances that have gone to China, one Deng Xiaoping liberalized economy, have gone from the overseas Chinese. In the Indian situation, we have to remember one thing. One, in many countries, they are very poor. They are not Kamadhenus and New Delhi assumes. In Malaysia, we constitute 8% of the population, but we own only 1.5% of the national wealth. In Singapore, which is the most developed country in our region, people of Indian origin who are citizens of Singapore, their income, per capita income, is less than the national average. The expatriates do very well. That is, those Indian citizens who work in the university, IT industry, and all, they earn from. But there is a big divide between the two. And the other thing is that even those who are rich, they are hesitating to invest in India. In fact, the Gujaratis who were thrown out of Uganda, they all went to England. None of them came to India. The British banks provided with the credit, and then again they started. In the 1970s, the government of India introduced one scheme. In NRI, or the Indian community who live abroad can open accounts in State Bank of India in dollars. They will earn interest in dollars, and they could also withdraw in dollars. And when the economic crisis took place in our country, there was a mad scramble to withdraw the dollar from these dollar accounts and all. I.G. Patel, who was economic advisor to the government, was governor of the Reserve Bank of India, one of the well-known economists. He delivered the Lal Bahadur Shastri Memorial Lecture in Delhi. I was present there. And then he said, the non-resident Indian may have his heart in India, but he would prefer to keep his money abroad. Unlike the Chinese and all. In fact, in 1976, the Singapore statesman Lee Kuan Yew meets Deng Xiaoping. I'll take a couple of minutes. Meets Deng Xiaoping, and he tells him, we overseas Chinese have come from the poorest of the poor parts in China, southern China. But we have come here, we have worked hard, we have become rich. We are only 4% of the population of China, but we earn 4 times more the national wealth of China. And he was the one who influenced Deng Xiaoping to liberalize the economy. And more than Lee Kuan Yew, his finance minister, Dr. Gokeng was the advisor for the construction of export promotion zones and all. Now, I mentioned about political loyalty towards India can be a hindrance and all. Lee Kuan Yew in his memoirs mentioned in 1974-75, the Chinese start their ping-pong diplomacy. They want to establish good relations with Southeast Asian countries, and as a prelude to it, they sent table tennis team. So Singapore also they came. The Chinese team was playing against the Singapore team, and the local Chinese constitute 76% of the population of Singapore. They were all cheering China and not Singapore team. So Lee Kuan Yew writes in his memoirs, I have done so much for the prosperity of Singapore, but these people are still showing their loyalty to China. During the Olympic Games in China, the Olympic torch was taken to different countries. In most of the Western countries, there were demonstrations against the Olympic torch for the China's human rights violations. But when it came to Southeast Asian countries, all the overseas Chinese living in Burma, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, all of them, they demonstrated in favor of China. And the Chinese premier congratulated them. You are the proud children of China, and I congratulate you. So if the economic links at the later stage become political links, then in all these countries which are already xenophobic, where the nationalist movement had a xenophobic character, the indigenous people will revolt against the Chinese. And whenever and wherever anti-Chinese riots had taken place in Southeast Asia, in 52, in 59, 60, 66 during the Cultural Revolution, after the fall of Suharto in Indonesia and in Vietnam, China could not do anything to help them. Not merely that, China's policy towards these countries also suffered a setback. So my submission is that we should not try to get a political loyalty towards India. Economic loyalty, all right, and country to country it varies. In Southeast Asian countries where nation building is a new exercise, they suspect any action which shows of Indianness among them. There was a Hindi film by Hrithik Roshan where the Nepalis are presented as in a bad light, and in Nepal there were anti-Indian riots. In countries like Canada and the United States, there is no problem. You can show your affection and loyalty towards India, but you can be loyal to the United States. They are broad-minded, but not many of these countries. Now, after Narendra Modi has come to power, he has gone and addressed overseas Indian communities in Australia, in the United States, in England, in Fiji, in Malaysia, as well as in Singapore. There was a news item in the Hindu which said the Singapore government discouraged the Indians who had taken Singapore citizenship from participating in the meeting. And that's a part of the BJP legacy, because Vajpayee, as I told you, had always taken interest especially in the United States and all that. But if we start pulling them politically towards India, then we will have problems in all these countries. If we take an over, then comes, there are a lot of savings of the NRIs in the Indian bank. They have been showing steady increase. One reason being in the United States and Canada and all, the interest that you get for your money that you deposit in the bank is minimal, 2% or, whereas here you get more. And Narendra Modi has come out with the idea of private-public partnership. So the NRIs could be encouraged to invest in those projects with the government, especially for the building of the infrastructure. That perhaps will be a very good achievement on the part of the Government of India. But I'll keep my fingers crossed whether it will succeed. If you take an overview of the Indian and the Chinese diaspora, one characteristic feature is their resilience against all adversities. They are like a phoenix. They have risen up after turmoil, after riots and all. And this, I submit, will continue in the days to come also. I shall conclude with that thing. If there are any simple queries, I shall answer. If there are difficult ones, nothing to that.
If oil prices are going down, oil price is going down, what will happen to people in the station?